Hello everyone, welcome to Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy. Ant-Man and the Wasp, Easter eggs, we found a bunch. Spoilers ahead, here we go. The opening scene with the perfectly de-aged Michelle Pfeiffer follows the same pattern as the first Ant-Man, where a prologue introduces the audience to the main conflict of the film. In Ant-Man, it was to protect the Pym particles from outside manipulation, and in this film, it's to find Hank's wife, Janet. Scott's opening pretend heist with Cassie is a nice nod to the first Ant-Man, which was a heist movie. It's also a sign that this time around, they're going to be doing something different. And by the way, how did Scott afford his house? In the first movie, he was getting fired from Baskin-Robbins, and now he owns a 3-story in the heart of San Francisco? I mean, I'm guessing it was payment from Hank for services rendered, but man, that's like $1 million home. So the FBI agent that's keeping tabs on Scott is Jimmy Woo, who has been a secret agent in Marvel Comics since the 1950s when he battled the villain Yellow Claw. And there's another FBI agent straight from the comics, Jeffrey Ballard. Ballard was secretly working for Sonny Burch in the film, but in the comics, he's the villain Centurion, an enemy of Goliath. Wu tells Cassie that her daddy violated the Sokovia Accords, which were signed into law during Captain America's Civil War and keep superheroes from superheroing without a license.
Hank Pym always said you never can trust a Stark.
Who are you?
Come on, man.
Scott and his ex-con friends have started a security company appropriately called Ex-Con. In the comics, Scott Lang started a similar security company called Ant-Man Solutions. When Luis is panicking about the business going under, he reminds himself, I'm the boss, I'm the boss, I'm the boss. He might have picked this catchphrase up from his friend Scott.
I'm the boss, I'm the boss, I'm the boss, I'm the boss.
A scene from the movie Animal House is playing in the background where we hear this line.
One tiny atom in my fingernail could be
one little tiny universe.
It's a nice way to foreshadow the film's later trip to the quantum realm, which is a universe that exists on a smaller scale inside of our own. And maybe it's not an Easter egg per se, but when Luis finds the giant ant and says Scott, he's definitely thinking of the Jeff Goldblum horror film The Fly, where the hero slowly turns into a giant insect. One of the villains in the movie is Sonny Burch, played by Walt Goggins. In the comics, he used to work for Cross Technologies, which was owned by Darren Cross, the villain in the first Ant-Man. Hank is carrying around an Altoid can spring-loaded with ants ready to grow on a moment's notice, and I couldn't help but remember a series of magazine ads Altoids ran years ago, one of which featured Iron Man. The item that Hank and Hope need to complete the quantum tunnel is called a quantum spectrometer. This is an extremely useful device in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as several were used to track down the Tesseract during the Avengers.
How many spectrometers do you have access to? Well, every lab you know. Tell them to put the spectrometers on the roof and calibrate them for gamma rays.
Scott is stressed out over their ball caps and sunglasses disguises, saying we look like ourselves at a baseball game. Now, I couldn't help but remember when Steve Rogers was on the run in Captain America Winter Soldier, and one of the most famous men in the world went unnoticed because he was wearing a hat and sunglasses. Later, when they escaped the FBI, a cluster of ants cloud the security cameras, repeating this trick from the first Ant-Man film. And I just gotta pause here. I don't understand why Hope and Hank had to take Scott from his house. I know they wanted to find Janet, but they could have waited a couple days and Scott would have been free from house arrest. It seems like they did it just because they were mad at him. I don't know. Maybe I'm being picky. Just let me know in the comments what you think. Ghost's father was a scientist named Elias Starr, who was the villain Egghead in the comics and a longtime enemy of Ant-Man. Ant-Man really drew the short straw in Arches, didn't he? Lawrence Fishburne plays Dr. Bill Foster. He's an old colleague of Hank Pym's on a project named Goliath. In the Marvel Comics, Foster is a lab assistant of Hank Pym's who acquires the Pym particle formula and becomes a size-changing hero in his own right named Goliath, or sometimes Black Goliath. You know, just in case you couldn't tell. This movie also shows Hope take on her mother's mantle as the Wasp. In the comic books, Janet Van Dyne has been the Wasp since the 1960s. But in the MC2 line of comics, there is an alternate future with a Hope Pym who becomes the Wasp just like her mother. When Janet takes control of Scott's body, she calls Hope clever girl. This may remind you of this scene in Jurassic Park, but actually women have been called clever girl in movies for decades. For your convenience, we here at Screen Crush have made a supercut in a separate video that we'll link in the comments. In the background in this scene, you can see that the lab is powered by a giant Duracell battery, which actually has huge implications for the world. Basically, Hank has figured out a way to expand the molecules between energy to create more energy. Or maybe it only works in the lab as tiny. They don't really specify. Luis tells Sonny Burch and his goons that his grandma had a jukebox in her restaurant that only played Morrissey. And he must have told all his friends this story because later, when he calls Scott, the ringtone is the Morrissey song Every Day is Like Sunday. Kurt keeps talking about Baba Yaga, a monster from Russian folklore. However, Baba Yaga has also appeared in the Marvel comic books as well, fighting Captain Britain. We see Scott actually meet Janet in the quantum realm, which was alluded to in the first film. While Scott was in the QR, we see brief flashes that show the outline of the Wasp. When Scott complains to his daughter Cassie that he needs a partner, Cassie says that she should be his sidekick. Actually, the comic book version of Cassie does grow up to become a hero, with her father's growing and shrinking abilities becoming Stature or Stinger, respectively. And quick aside, I love that Scott's suit continues to malfunction all the way throughout the movie. It gives us some nice subdued comedy, like when he struggles to walk down a flight of stairs. But it also continues the superhero movie tradition of the superhero's powers not quite working right in their sequels, like Superman 2, Spider-Man 2, and the Wolverine. Scott Lang first grew to supersize in Captain America Civil War, but Ant-Man and the Wasp is the first time somebody actually calls him Giant Man. The movie ends with Scott, Hope, Cassie, and several other presumably empty cars watching a movie at the most dangerous drive-in in the world. The movie is Them, a 1954 science fiction monster classic. The film is about the FBI investigating a science experiment gone wrong that created giant berserker ants. And at one point in the movie, Bill Foster points to the ants in the lab and screams, "It's them!" which might be a call out to the film. But there's an obvious parallel here to the film's running plot of FBI agent Jimmy Woo almost finding a giant ant in Scott's house. And there's also a more direct parallel. The last line of the film,
"When man entered the atomic age, he opened a door into a new world. What we'll eventually find in that new world, nobody can predict,"
is in some ways also about the quantum realm. Sonny Birch says that quantum energy is the future, and now Hank and Janet have unlocked the realm's potential. In the mid-credits scene, the ex-con van that contains the miniaturized quantum tunnel has the La Cucaracha honk from Luis's van in Ant-Man. And we've already done a whole video about the mid-credits scene. It talks about time vortexes and how it potentially sets up Thanos' defeat in Avengers 4. If you're curious, you should definitely check that video out. And finally, in the last post-credits scene, we see some of the fallout of Thanos' snap, the emergency broadcast symbol on television, and the camera slowly pans over to Scott's dutiful proxy Ant, who's forever cursed to bang on drums, while outside the world is ending. That's all the Easter eggs that we found, but hey guys, what did we miss? Please, dear God, let me know in the comments below. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and check out all of our other related Marvel videos. Thanks for watching.